Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another update from the onslaught of activities that are taking place here in Washington. I want to hit 3 or 4 things at the top, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. The week, frankly, started on kind of a down note for me because I could only get one Republican senator, Senator McConnell, to stand with me and all of the Democratic colleagues to vote against Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence. I pray that my feeling in terms of her lack of judgment or unwillingness to keep things secret will prove to be false. I hope she does well. But boy, oh boy, to give an individual who seems to always side with our enemies' views, who's unable to call Edward Snowden a traitor, is more than a little bit chilling, now running all 18 of our intelligence community agencies. As vice chairman of the committee, I'm going to keep a close watch on her and all of these appointees to make sure that our men and women in the IC are not undercut. We move from the IC to another action, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB. I was part of one of the authors of the Dodd-Frank bill that created this entity to make sure that consumers were not harmed by large financial institutions. This goes back to the 2008 financial crisis where people were constantly being ripped off with little found promises and mortgages. There's a host of other areas in terms of late fees. The CFPB has done its job. Over $20 billion has been returned to consumers. Well, what do you do with an agency like that was approved by Congress? The new OMB director, Russell Vought, who was the author of the nefarious Project 2025 that called for elimination of most of the government, he's come in without authority and basically told everybody at CFPB to work from home this week. Who knows what they're doing in terms of disturbing, misusing, going into data that's at the agency. This is all an effort to try to shut down the CFPB. We will litigate that just as we will litigate all of these issues. I wish that some of my Republican colleagues would show some courage. It's their consumers who are also being harmed by taking down this agency. But this one, it looks like we'll have to fight in the courts. And then finally, just finished voting no on Robert Kennedy Jr., again, someone who brings his kind of out of the mainstream views, particularly around vaccines, to our nation's leading healthcare position. Certain things about Mr. Kennedy I like, the focus on chronic illnesses, the focus on healthy eating, but that is far more outweighed by the fact of his kind of anti-science approach on vaccines and medical research. Matter of fact, he told me he wanted to eliminate 2,200 positions at NIH. He couldn't tell me which positions, but if we suddenly were to lose some of our top scientists from our premier laboratory, that would be devastating. And in a sign of what's coming, the administration, just within the last 48 hours, cut out $4 billion from medical research. That will directly affect Virginia colleges and universities. Matter of fact, I got a call from Rosemary today down on the peninsula, where her husband, who is a professor, felt like this cut on research dollars could directly affect their job. This is not a way to keep Americans safe. This is not a way to make sure that we protect women's reproductive health care needs. This is not a way for America to continue to be the leader in research and development. By making these cuts, we are basically ceding the ground to China to take advantage. China is very, very active in medical research, very active in genetic research, and this is both short-sighted from a healthcare standpoint. It's also short-sighted from a national security standpoint. Those are just some of the activities of the week. Trump continues to flood the zone with executive orders, some legal, many probably illegal. I was disappointed to see that the buyout offer the judge removed the restraining order, and I just am deeply concerned for those federal employees who took that offer, when I can tell you there is no money in the budget past March 14th for any of those payments to be made. We'll see if we get a budget, what happens, but I go back to Mr. Trump's record, frankly, his pitiful record in terms of his willingness to keep his promises or pay contractors. So I hope people will think long and hard before they take up an offer that where you may not get paid out, but you may end up simply losing your job without any benefits at all. So with that as a backdrop, Laura, why don't I turn it over to you and we'll start taking questions.
Senator, our first, Medius with Virginia Business.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for today. I just wanted to go back to the 29 crash up.
Yeah, I can't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Could you? There's so much background. I can't hear what you're saying. Could you try again?
Yeah, let me try again. Is this better?
A little bit. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to go back to the January 29th crash at Reagan Airport. You had been very vocal last year about Congress's desire to add 10 more flights a day at the airport prior to the crash. Wanted to hear kind of where you stand on that now. And I also was curious if you've had any insight into the NTSB's investigation or any conversations with them or the FAA. And there was a New York Times story today that offered more insight. We've known that there have been near misses, but this story gave a lot more in-depth detail about several near misses that were almost identical to the January 29th crash, going back many years, and detailed problems with controller staffing, controller training. So I'm curious, what's next? Where do you stand on what happened since the crash?
Okay. Well, first of all, I have huge faith in the NTSB. It takes them a little bit of time, but I think their record of identifying causation in these kind of accidents is top rate, and I'm going to wait for their conclusions. One. Two, I wish that I wasn't right. I wish the concerns that Tim Kaine and I raised repeatedly to our colleagues, don't try to cram more flights into the busiest runway in America. I mean, National was set up for 15 million passengers. It's got 25 million. And to have this tragedy come about, I'm not saying it was congestion per se. I want to wait for the NTSB, but we said, please let the FAA decide the flights going in, not Congress, not to simply make it easier for a congressman to fly home from National rather than Dulles. On the question of what's happened already, I know the FAA has slowed, I think, the takeoff route. There was some indications early on that takeoffs were getting more favorability, and they were rushing through some of those. That's been reported. I don't have full evidence on that, but I think the FAA has slowed the takeoff and landing cycle a little bit. And I am glad to see that at least for a while, helicopter traffic around National has been slowed. I mean, as somebody who lives close to National, you've got a helicopter that it all transverses the Potomac. You've got these planes coming in at a huge rapid rate on the main runway, and that spells a recipe for disaster. And unfortunately, we saw that disaster, and now 67 lives have been lost. So I'm going to wait for the full explanation from NTSB. I think they're about this at a rapid pace, but I think in the interim, I wish my members of Congress would rethink, the next time they try to cram more airplanes in, and let the safety considerations, let the FAA make these determinations. Final point I want to make is air traffic controllers. We're about 10,800 air traffic controllers. We need about 13,000 roughly. If those air traffic controllers start taking this buyout offer, we're up the creek. because it takes a year plus of training and then another year of training in a very busy tower like National to be certified. God forbid, if we had a couple thousand air traffic controllers quit, air traffic in America would grind to a halt. And this is again shows the short-sightedness, the lack of thought when people who've never run an operation like the U.S. government come in and willy-nilly put forward these kind of buyout offers without reflecting on what happens if people actually take the offer. This is not the same as Twitter. This is not the same as a tech company where you can plug in one coder for another. These are jobs that require enormous experience, enormous training, and whether it's the air traffic controller, whether it's the crypto scientist, sorry about that, at NSA, or the top spy at CIA, or the person that inspects our food. Come on, we're playing with people's lives and we're playing with the security of our country.
As a reminder to everyone on the line, please mute your mics and mute your devices. We're hearing a little bit of feedback on the line. Our next question is Mitchell Miller from WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thanks a lot for joining us. Wanted to ask you more about what's happening with Elon Musk. He has said this week that he is showing a lot of transparency, although a lot of people have doubts about that. During Tulsi Gabbard's debate, you alluded on the Senate floor this week to your concerns about what he is doing and how it could be a security risk. In fact, the Connecticut Attorney General recently called it a massive data breach. What are your concerns related to that, and what more would you like to see him and the administration do as they explain these cuts?
Well, again, Mr. Musk is a very successful business person. I have no question about that. Matter of fact, I helped him more than a decade ago as he was trying to break into what was then an existing space monopoly with SpaceX, and it's done a great job. But here's my concerns. We don't know who these DOGE folks are. The few that we found out about, we found one was an avowed racist. We found another had been fired for leaking information. You're letting them in to our databases, and we don't know whether it's a read-only or read and write. What kind of mischief can they play? We don't even know their identities. That's outrageous. On top of that, Mr. Musk, look at his comments over the years. He's always been trashing the United States government, the European government. You never hear him trash the Chinese government. He talks fondly about the Chinese regime, the authoritarianism. Why? He's got his biggest Tesla factory there. Why? He gets most of the batteries he puts in his Teslas from oftentimes near slave labor from the Uyghur population. I'm very concerned as we get into these areas of conflict between the United States and China about this possible conflict of interest. Or the idea, for example, now that the DOGE bros are going into NASA. SpaceX is both a client of NASA and also sometimes a competitor. What are they looking for? What is the information? Where is that information going to end up? Is it going to end up staying on classified government servers, or is it going to end up somehow in a back office that could give Mr. Musk and his enterprises competitive advantage? We are seeing there's never been a group of special government employees when we don't know most of their names, when we don't know their security clearances. The kid who for a while was inside Treasury was 25 and had a secret classification. That is the lowest level of classification. You couldn't look at virtually anything that I review with only secret. There's secret, top secret, SSCI, and then even a higher classification. Some of the information on those files, the highest classification in our government is required because it's frankly, in a sense, the checkbook of the United States. You want to go after a program, fine, go after a program where it's authorized, where somebody has to vet it. Getting this kind of personal level information is extraordinarily dangerous. And if word got out, you don't think the Chinese and the Russians would pay whatever it takes to get access? Because candidly, some of our classified programs could be identified either by somebody maliciously or just being an ignorant fool and letting some of this information out.
Senator, our next question is Raquel Martin with Nexstar.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for taking out the time. Now, I know in the last Congress there was discussion among Democrats and Republicans about passing regulations on artificial intelligence. At this point, do you think that that moment has been lost? We're hearing from the Trump administration, particularly from the vice president at a global summit this week, that they're looking more towards rolling back regulations and not stifling the technology.
Listen, I'm all for innovation, and I think AI has the power to transform our lives. And frankly, we're not going to put the genie fully back in the bottle because companies like Meta, which is Facebook, have put out an open source model. And that open source model led to some of the Chinese development around DeepSeek, for example. I do think there are ways, though, that we can protect our crown jewels, and that is limiting some of the GPU chips that NVIDIA makes in terms of sales to China or sales to third world countries that may be our adversaries. You know, we never sold F-35s to China because that was part of our national security. I don't think we should be selling our most advanced chips. But I also think we need to be, I'm going to be in Munich starting later today with a lot of the tech companies who a year ago promised that they would cut back on the usage of deep fakes in political advertising. Truth is, they did very little to cut back on those deep fakes. And I continue to worry about deep fakes not only manipulating the public on politics, but quite honestly, the ability to manipulate the markets. I would think, as somebody who has trust in the markets, and our American markets are the strongest in the world, you have somebody that appears to be a CEO or a chairman of the Fed making statements that's not, and you could throw huge chaos into the confidence in our markets. There is an area that I've been doing a lot of thinking about, though, that would require legislation that would allow, it's called the concept of delegability, and I won't wimp out or nerd out entirely on this, but this is the ability for you to have a personalized AI agent that might be able to then sort through your social media posts, where that agent could help make sure that content that's offensive you don't see. Now, that would be your personal choice. It also might be a way to be used in terms of some of your personal healthcare information. But the security of those AI agents to make sure that they're not vulnerable to cyber attacks is a whole new domain that I think we have to look at. So AI is here to stay. It's going to bring a lot of positive. It's also going to disrupt a lot of jobs. But there are national security implications in terms of manipulation of images and, frankly, the ability to put at least some guardrails in place if we get to the point of what's called AGI, real thinking artificial generative intelligence, which candidly is a lot closer than we would have expected even 2 years ago.
Senator, our next question is Tom Fitzgerald with Fox 5. Sorry, we have to move on. Tom Fitzgerald.
Senator, good afternoon. Thank you. The White House says about 75,000 federal employees have taken the buyout deal. The judge last night did not rule on the legality of the program, only saying that the unions did not have standing. There was another lawsuit, we understand now, filed in D.C. Government funding runs out in 29 days, Senator. Will this have any impact on how Democrats proceed on a new CR, given the fact that you get 75,000 former, soon-to-be former federal employees waiting on a paycheck through September if this gets shut down?
Well, I'd say to those folks what I said before. You can always tell a scammer by the way they advertise. It's always call now, offer expires at midnight. Well, that was the exact tactics that the Trump administration used. And you're right, in 29 days, funding runs out. And I'm going to be very curious to see whether my Republican colleagues who are marching in lockstep right now with Trump are going to be willing to put that money in the budget to make sure these folks get paid for another 6 months without doing anything. Seems to be the opposite of what Trump was trying to do. And on the same hand, we don't know who these 75,000 are. What I worry if we are losing some of our most experienced people, that it may cost twice as much to replace them, to train up. I thought this was ill-conceived, ill-executed, and I'm afraid that a lot of employees may be left holding nothing but a pink slip at the end of the day.
Senator, our next question is Chris Horn with Wavy News.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for taking my call. I sent some information to your staff about Harbor Point Mental Health Center here in Portsmouth and how it was cited in a Senate Finance report in last fall regarding shortcomings and really, frankly, abuses of some of the residents, the teenage residents there. What can the federal government, what can you in the Senate try to do to address these shortcomings and problems at Harbor Point?
Well, Chris, first of all, thank you for your good reporting. I've read it. These stories are horrific, and we need to find ways to improve for the patients and frankly, across the system. This is mostly administered by the state, so we're trying to work with Governor Youngkin to see what else we can do to kind of have a combined state and federal activity. There are two pieces of legislation that recently became law that will help a bit. One was the Paris Hilton legislation that kind of grants some additional rights for folks. I can't recall the name of it. That was signed late last year. And then there was another bill signed that I supported just this year that frankly gives the states more tools on how they can correct malfeasance. But the front line of this will be the state. And, if there are additional rules or regulations, particularly that we could propose at the federal level, that if you hit a certain number of violations, your federal funding shuts off. I'm taking a look at that, but I don't have anything to propose right now. But in the interim, I'm glad that you guys are staying on this, and we're going to stay on the governor as well to see what we can do in concert.
Senator, our next question is Susan Cameron with the Cardinal News.
Hi, Senator.
Okay.
So I was wondering if you could speak to reports that the abandoned mine land revitalization program has been frozen and is no longer accepting state requests.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. I didn't understand what you said. Could you say that again, please?
Yes, I was wondering if you could report that the abandoned mine land revitalization program has been frozen and is no longer accepting Virginia requests.
I hadn't heard that, but I'm not surprised. Even though the freeze on funding got rescinded, even though it still appears that selectively the administration is sending out money to some programs, not to others. I mean, we've reported a lot on community health centers in Virginia that have shut down. A lot of the nonprofits that the money flows to the state and then out to the nonprofit that have shut down. The abandoned mine program, mostly out in Southwest, is terribly important as we try to reclaim some of the land where the mines have been. Frankly, it's been really valuable as we think about new road construction and other initiatives. Let me do a little more research on that, though, and see if I can get an explanation, and we'll get back to you. I had not heard that had been frozen, but candidly, there's not much that's going to actually surprise me these days. But we'll get you more
Senator,
information.
our next question is Bill Atkinson with the Petersburg Progress Index.
Yep.
Good afternoon, Senator. Always a pleasure and honor to speak with you.
Thank you, Bill.
As we all know, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth found a way to rename Fort Liberty back to Fort Bragg, just not the original namesake, the Confederate namesake. He's promised more to come, which inevitably will include Fort Gregg Adams, Fort Walker, and Fort Barfoot. Would you please share your thoughts about what his action has done and the possibility of the Virginia Post being renamed and how you plan to respond to it.
Listen, there was a lengthy process to rename the bases, and candidly, I was very pleasantly surprised when the bases in Virginia were renamed, that there seemed to be very little pushback. What appears to me is the defense secretary is trying to, poke a hornet's nest when folks are pretty satisfied with the names that reflect, another part of American history. I hope he will think twice in Virginia before he would go about renaming, and if he does, I'm sure Tim Kaine and Jennifer McClellan and Bobby Scott and hopefully the balance of the delegation will stand up and say, we went through a process in Virginia. People, for the most part, I think felt heard and listened to. Why reopen this can of worms when people are already have moved on?
Senator, our next question is Avery Davis with 29 News.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for speaking with us. I'm just looking to hear your reaction to Trump's action to abolish the Federal Executive Institute located in Charlottesville. It employs a couple dozen federal employees here in the city, and I know there's been still a little bit of confusion if it's actually going to go through and happen, but I'm eager to hear your reaction.
Okay, Avery, could you tell me again which institute?
It's the Federal Executive Institute. It's been around for about 50 years. It trains federal employees.
Right. I mean, again, things are happening so fast and furious. I had not heard that. I guess I'm not surprised, because clearly if the Trump administration valued experienced leadership, they wouldn't have made a blanket buyout offer. And that executive training entity in Charlottesville, far enough away from D.C., yet close enough to be convenient for people to take the courses, to be surrounded by the history that University of Virginia and Charlottesville provide. That is the kind of penny-wise, pound-foolish approach this guy takes. You want your senior cadre of government officials to have leadership training. There's not a major company in America that doesn't provide that leadership training. To shut this down with no warning is ill-suited, will end up costing taxpayers more money, and frankly, for people who were lined up to go and take the classes, it's downright cruel.
Senator, our next question is Margaret Barthel with WAMU.
Hi, Senator. We've been hearing a lot about USAID contractors and employees who are kind of in limbo or have already been furloughed. Many of those jobs are in Virginia. I'm wondering if you have a sense of the scale of the impact of the sort of dismantling of USAID on the Commonwealth.
Well, I think it's, excuse me, can you shut off the phone? I think the close to 10,000 workers that have been furloughed or in the process of being laid off, it's beyond bizarre. I mean, I've had folks call saying they're stranded in Africa, where the rest of the AID mission had already left, and they didn't even have a ticket back. I mean, is that how the United States government treats people who are on the front line of trying to use American soft power? I think it's reprehensible. But as your comment made, it's not just the AID folks directly. It's all the contractors. If you look at any of the world feeding programs, if you look at CARE, if you look at disaster relief, if you look at folks trying to bring clean water to communities, these organizations, which are oftentimes recipients of the grants, they're laying off people at numbers 5 and 10 times more than what AID is. I think this will have a huge hit in terms of America's presence around the world, and it is being greeted Let me just tell you, we got Chinese media, Russian media, Iranian media, all applauding Trump getting rid of AID because they know that's the way America can burnish its reputation and earn friends around the world for pennies on the dollar. I can guarantee you China will be rushing in to try to provide this food and assistance, and it will help them in their geopolitical positioning. But I think in terms of the region, I think the region will take a hit. It'll be hard to measure which part is simply AID or nonprofits, which part are CFPB employees or other employees. But our economy is going to take a dramatic hit across the region, and we need leaders at the state level and the federal level, and for that matter, the local level, to all step up and speak out. This idea, if you keep your head low, that maybe none of this is going to hurt you, that just is not going to be a successful formula.
Senator, our next question is Jason Miller with Federal News Network.
Hey, thanks, Senator. I wanted to just touch base on the impact of DOGE and on contractors. Have you had any conversations, for instance, with Governor Youngkin or other industry leaders in the federal contractor community about the impact of DOGE cutting contracts and going into agencies? Seems to be a very quiet response from that industry so far, and I just want to know if you've had any conversations.
Well, I've had a number of conversations with contractors who did work for AID. I've had last week, I met with, we've got a growing space community in Virginia, located mostly here in Northern Virginia, but also down at Wallops Island. Huge concerns there that their contracts may be slowed. Even before Trump came in, I met with all of the major defense contractors in the region, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs. I charged them with trying to see how we could engage with DOGE if there's ways to be smart on efficiency. For example, we have way too many lawsuits after a contract's awarded. I'd be happy to move that to the loser pays. So if you bring a frivolous suit, you gain no advantage, or move to more fixed price contracts, which could give more flexibility but also lower prices. So far, those contractors, I think, have kept their head low because Trump and Musk have not moved to the DOD, but they're moving there next. And I would simply say to them, you guys need to step up and speak out as you see, in many cases, what is going to be a waste of money because many of these functions are critical to our national security, and firing experienced people and trying to rehire newbies or simply using technology to replace individuals at this stage, I think will end up costing taxpayers money.
Senator, our next question is Rachel Branning with WSET.
Hi, Senator. Thank you so much for doing this. So when it comes to DOGE, many Republican lawmakers have said that Elon Musk is making needed cuts, specifically on DEI programs and programs overseas. Do you think that those taxpayer dollars were being spent efficiently, and do you think that any cuts like these should have been made before President Trump took office?
Listen, I think having a workforce that looks like America makes sense to me. If we have in Virginia, we're about 40% people of color. If that big a piece of Virginia's economy is not actively involved across all layers of the private sector and government, we're not going to be as efficient. So if there were one-off programs that went too far, fine, let's debate about those. But let's not come in with a sledgehammer and destroy, in the case of AID, 70 years of work, 70 years. I mean, this was not, just Republican George Bush with PEPFAR, had one of the most trusted international initiatives in modern history. Or coming into the CFPB and not even looking at the value of the $20+ billion that goes out to consumers, shutting that down without any government approval. You can't, Neither one of these guys are kings. If Congress sets up a program, Congress has to unwind it. And it just flabbergasts me that none of my Republican colleagues have been willing, at least to this date, to step up and say, that's just a bridge too far. We've got this budget debate coming up. How do you do a deal with someone that can't keep a promise or doesn't observe contracts? I think it raises real questions about the value of having a contract with the federal government. I talked earlier about these cuts to research institutions. This formula on how much is overhead and how much is not, how much goes to research, that's not ad hoc. That was a set of a negotiation. There is a contract signed. The idea that those contracts are simply being thrown out the window means, one, people may be hesitant to do advanced research. Two, you're going to see the whole system tied up in lawsuits. And three, it sure as heck, raises a lot of questions with me when you've got these young coders. They may be great coders, but they have no knowledge of most of the subjects and most of the agencies they're looking at, going in and willy-nilly, destroying and calling out programs. You want to highlight some bad programs? Let's have at it. If need be, we'll eliminate them. But shutting down whole functions of government is illegal and will end up costing the taxpayer money.
Senator, our next question is Angela Jones with the Hampton Roads Messenger.
Hi, Senator Warner. Thank you for taking time for this update and availability. Over the last 24 days or so since the president was sworn in, is there any issue or legislation that stands out that Senate Democrats and Republicans have been able to agree on or work together on to move forward?
Well, so far, most all of the work of the Senate has been on these confirmations. And, I initially voted for a number of Mr. Trump's nominees. As a former governor, I generally believe the president or governor ought to get their picks. I stopped that last week when so many of these outrageous actions, particularly by DOGE, counter to the law, without appropriate security clearances, where I said, I'm just not going to vote for these folks if they're not going to respect the law and the Constitution. I'm sure there'll be areas where we'll work together. I've got a lot of bipartisan legislation, for example, in cyber and healthcare. We're still working on trying to see how we can get the Chinese out of our telecom networks. But these first few weeks there's been nothing on the floor of the Senate that's been about lowering the price of eggs or the price of groceries, the reasons why Donald Trump was elected. What has been on the floor of the Senate is a lot of irresponsible, ill-equipped Trump loyalists being put into positions of power, oftentimes without regard to rule of law or, for that matter, enough appropriate concerns about our nation's security.
Senator, our final question is Beth Jojak with Virginia Business.
Hello, Senator. I wanted to ask about CFPB being shuttered and the lawsuit they had against Capital One. I wanted to know what your feelings were about the likelihood that it's going to be dropped.
Yeah, I have not followed the specifics of legislation or litigation that CFPB has brought. They're in certain areas. I think they were very aggressive. I think I have no problem with CFPB doing its job, but doing it in a way where you try to work with the litigant first. What I do have a problem with is an organization that's returned over $20 billion to consumers because of fraud, because of rip-off scams, arbitrarily being shut down with no warning. I mean, what happens if it's the FBI next? What happens if it's whatever, the Department of Environmental Protection Agency, just because it's in the political crosshairs of some of the very wealthy folks who make up the Trump administration? This is not the way America ought to be governed. And I know there's a lawsuit pending, but why are we spending this much time, money, and effort when if President Trump has got ideas about reform of CFPB or any other entity, present it to the Congress, let us weigh in, let us figure out if there's a way to fix it or make it better, and then we can try to come to agreement. What we can't come to is by executive fiat, and a stroke of a pen, this president dismantling wide swaths of government that had broad bipartisan support. That's just not the way our Constitution and system works.
Senator, that was our final question.
Well, thank you, everybody. Stay safe. I'm sure we'll look forward to next week's adventures, and I'll give you another report from D.C. Thanks so much.